So, if you are new here, welcome. Let me tell you what we are. We are a church that is right now 100% digital, and what that means is we record during the week. We record worship during the week. We build a service for the online, and that same exact online service that you're watching, maybe on a computer, maybe on a phone, is also a part of what goes on in the live service. We're already bigger. Shiloh Ranch is already bigger than what we could geographically support. We're in a small town. We're in a small community. Our actual town, for you guys that aren't familiar with Powell, Butte, Oregon, is a charter school that goes to 8th grade and a gas station. And so we know that to be effective in reaching the people that we've been called to, we know that that's got to include online. And so here's what's cool is that a lot of churches maybe include online. It's kind of like the sidebar as to what goes on. But right now, our people that are here in person, that have been here since the beginning in 2012, they are stretching. They're watching online with you, even in the live services right now. And so just know that if you're watching, like I said, on a device, there's a group of people who believe that what God is doing here is so meaningful that they're willing to stretch and sort of lean into the discomfort on behalf of those who might be tuning in sort of from a safe space. So we're glad you're here. Our goal is that we want to see small gatherings popping back up in these small communities where like a traditional church model has struggled to thrive in the past. You know, we're in the middle of a weird transitional period in history of the U.S., and we see people moving out of the rural communities. It's hard to keep pastors, and we want to be a part of helping with that. We are in a series right now about the fruits of the Spirit, and if that's kind of a Bible-y term, fruits of the Spirit, it basically means that if someone commits to following Jesus and takes it serious and makes Jesus a part of their life and begins to base their decisions on who Jesus was and what Jesus said, then in return, our lives begin to produce fruit that goes beyond what we would produce on our own. There are some people that are just naturally kind of good people. It just seems like it's just easy for them to be good. And there's some people it seems like they just are naturally bent towards being bad. And what you find is that when people come to Jesus, what you find is that some are good at it and some are still kind of bad at it. That doesn't change. But the universal aspect is there's some gauges. There's some things that we can look at and say that if you're following Jesus, if Jesus is active in your life and in your decisions, Galatians 5 says that there are fruits of the Spirit. We're in week 5, Galatians 5:22, if you want to look them up. But we're in week 5. It goes, love, that's a spiritual fruit. God will begin to produce love more than you would have produced on your own. Love in your life. Love, joy, peace, forbearance. And we're in week 5, and week 5 is kindness. Now, if you're like me, you're a grown man, you hear kindness and you go, okay. I mean, I'm a grown up. I'm talking about kindness. Women, if you don't already know this, guys, when we go play golf or hanging out, we don't just sit around and go, you know what we need to get to? We got to discuss kindness, you guys. Kindness. Kindness, I mean, what an unexciting sermon premise. I've got to preach a whole sermon about kindness, and kindness isn't something I ever discuss. It seems like something that would be like on the wall at a kindergarten class of like, stand in line, wash your hands, be nice. If you're going to be a Christian, be nice. Can you understand how difficult, like at a glance, that would be? But men, real quick, sidebar, I will say most of the time, men determine the tone of niceness in a house. It is almost always the men that take the lead on how kind the house relationships are. So we can't just ignore it. And second of all, it's on the list. Like, it was so important that in Galatians, it gets listed as things that we're supposed to be producing if we're following Jesus. And so as much as I would love to just dismiss it, the truth is there is more to it than a kindergarten instruction. I don't preach about trends. And the reason I don't preach about trends is that they change. They can be based on all sorts of stupid things. And if you are a pastor who begins to preach on trends, then what happens a year from now, the trend changes and your whole message changes. And so I really make a point to try to stay away from trends and current events, things like that. Because again, like I said, I'm a grown up. I want to preach the Word. I want to go to the Word. I want to see what the Word says, because if I can find the truth of what's in the Word, then it doesn't matter how far down the road this sermon comes back up, it'll still be relevant. It's still based on the message of what Jesus taught when he was here. And when you look around in the world right now, it is so easy to see what happens when the world begins to lose its kindness. I mean, as much as I try to avoid trends and current events, if I'm going to preach about kindness, it is so easy to go, hey, we are suffering from a lack of kindness. And I think the reason is we don't really understand what kindness actually is. We think of kindness as just a general sense of niceness. Here's what I'm noticing. As people in 2020, we have become very good at justifying any type of bad behavior. It doesn't matter how bad the behavior is, so long as you're the maddest, you're the loudest, or you're the most offended. If you fit those three categories, all bets are off. Be as good or bad or terrible or whatever as you want to be because you've got an excuse. And there are two envelopes. You're like, is this going to be a sermon? We'll get to the word in a minute, but it's important that we understand the problem, because if we understand the problem, kindness literally serves to be the solution. There are two words defining the narrative right now that are leading the narrative in the public square, the public discussion in the United States right now. There are two things that are leading the narrative, and those two categories are this: victim and oppressor. We are working through as a nation how we feel about the concept of a victim or an oppressor. And one is the ultimate bad. We have now decided as a society or as a culture that if you're oppressive, you are just intrinsically bad. You're a bad person, and anything that happens to an oppressor is okay because the oppressor earned it. And the second category is victim. And now what we've started to do is we've started to incentivize being a victim. Now hear me on this. If a society begins to incentivize being a victim, then the actual victims don't get heard because they're in a sea of noise. People who need representation and defense from the society the most don't get it because it's like everybody's screaming wolf. And the problem that I see developing is that as a society, if you get to pick one or the other, everybody wants to claim they're a victim because nobody wants to be accused of being an oppressor. We're in a bind right now. We're in a bind right now because we have decided that you fall into one of two categories, and we can dehumanize any oppressor. It's all justifiable because they deserve it. And the problem is this: when we dehumanize anybody, we've started to fracture ourselves. If you can prove that you're a victim, then there are no rules. You can do whatever you want because you're the most offended. It's important before we go further that I clarify this point. This point has to be made. That there is a difference between somebody who has had bad circumstances inflicted on them. When I say a victim, there are victims in this world. There are people who have experienced terrible, horrific things that they didn't deserve and they couldn't have prevented. Hard stop. There's this counterfeit version of that, where someone comes in, looks for a way to capitalize on all the benefit that should have rightly been the person who actually has suffered an offense, and they try to steal it for themselves. And it gets so diluted that pretty soon the word victim means something much different. And I'm not talking about being a victim. I'm saying adopting a victim mentality or accepting a victim mindset is worse for people. It is worse for humanity than cancer. It is damaging us as a society. If you go, wait, is this leading towards victim shaming? I hope it's the opposite. I hope that the people who have had to suffer horrible atrocities feel defended by what I'm going to preach on. I hope you understand there's a difference between someone who is actually a victim and someone who's trying to capitalize on the concept. Let me say this. It is not the ultimate human achievement to reach victim status. If you've ever been an actual victim of something, you know it's not something anybody would want to go through. So when you take it lightly by going, yeah, I am too. No, I am too. No, I deserve more. No, I should be able to act bad. I should be able to do whatever I want. Then what you're doing is you're decreasing what it means to be a victim. The game of life is never won by who can be the most disadvantaged. I had it worse. No, me. No. There's a video going around right now, and as a pastor, it bothers me because it says, okay, everybody line up, we're going to race. And then they go through. You've probably seen it, and they go, oh, if you only have one parent, back up. Oh, if you're from this neighborhood, back up. Oh, if you only have this much money, back up. And what they're trying to teach is that not everybody gets the same head start. Life is not equal, and this is what equality means. And at a glance, I understand, but the pastor in me goes, when did God ever look at someone as disadvantaged? Ever. As a pastor, how can we look at the word and go, well, that person doesn't have a fair head start. That person will never get where they're supposed to go in life. Says who? God can use literally any circumstance to complete his call on your life. Literally anything that God wants to do in your life, he can do. He doesn't have to look around and go, oh, your skin color, oh, your gender, oh, your sexual preference, oh, your income. God is not as worried about the disadvantages as we are. Now listen, if there's a way that we can make life more fair, I'm for it. I'm not talking about making an attempt at equality. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we need to stop incentivizing people looking for their own disadvantages. And if you live in a country where you can prove that you've been oppressed and you thusly feel owed, you live in a country that is seeking justice. If you can go, hey, I got treated badly and that's wrong, according to who? According to the U.S., we are saying, hey, we've got some problems and we're trying to figure it out. That doesn't prove that the U.S. is bad. If the U.S. was bad, we would go, you're weak, well, then we need to kill you so that you're not a liability on the rest of us. Just a little bit of perspective. On what basis do you demand justice if you're oppressed, if not the government that is seeking justice? For goodness sakes, we are making an effort to get better. We are making an effort to do better, and I want to be a part of doing better, but we are not living in a broken nation. If you are oppressed and that is an advantage, then we've got it backwards. And the reason that people claim to be victims at such a high rate is that if we're not, our only other option is what? Somehow we're an oppressor. And right now, you do not want to be an oppressor. So if your options are you're either an oppressor or a victim, you're like, oh, I guess I'm a victim. I'm already hearing it. Oh, this is a terrible time to be a white man in this nation. Stop. I'm not a victim. I am not a victim. See, we're so determined not to be an oppressor that we run over here and try to act like a victim, and we're not. What does any of this have to do with kindness? Well, kindness might be less about what it starts. Kindness might be more about what it ends. Kindness might be the most effective for what it ends. Kindness is not a kindergarten word. Kindness is a hard word. And the reason it's a hard word is that it only comes up in reference of times when you don't want to be kind. If you're just kind when you feel like it, then you're not kind. You're just a person. Luke 6 says, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. There's more verses. I won't read them for the sake of time. It says, you are more defined by the way that you love your enemies. If you want to know if it's a godly interaction in your life, is that how do you treat those that are opposing you or that disagree with you? How kind and loving are you to your enemies? And you go, oh, well, then that's way harder. That's why it has to be supernatural. That's why we don't just naturally produce it on our own. It's hard. Now the idea of kindness is starting to make more sense. The Bible has a ton of stories of people who faced unfair disadvantages. The Bible is full of people who faced unfair disadvantages, and specifically one who got his legs wiped out from under him by systematic oppression. And I'm not trying to solve this with rules. I'm not trying to tell you the rules on how to solve the issues that we're facing as a nation. I just want to always point back to the Word, because somewhere in the Word, every story is demonstrated. Every story is revealed how to get it right, how to get it wrong. And right now, more than ever, we need to know what is in the Word to help us address the problems going on outside the world. Outside in the world, not outside. I don't know what the aliens are up to. 2 Samuel 9. Says, now David said, is there still anyone who is left in the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? Traditionally, if you were a king and you took over a kingdom, you wiped out everybody from the other royal family. You did away with all of the heirs. Anybody who had a rightful claim to the throne, you would eliminate them. This was common practice. This is how kingdoms worked. We think we've got it bad. They would just kill you based on who you were. And so when David said, is there anybody from the house of Saul? That's not automatically a good thing. That could have literally been a very, very bad thing. And even though that's how kingdoms were traditionally handled, I'm not saying that makes it right. That's not right. But who was going to hold David's feet to the fire? If David would go, hey, is there anybody in the house of Saul that you could round up that I could kill? No one's going to hold him accountable for that. That was the expected behavior of the day. So when he says that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake, he's not doing it under compulsion or because some rules dictated. He said, I loved Jonathan. I loved Saul's son, Jonathan. He was like a brother to me. Because of love, is there anybody that I can show kindness to? And, by the way, Saul's heirs would have literally been, technically, an enemy. David is saying, is there any more of my enemies that I can be kind to? Oppression has always historically been present. I mean, people and power and oppression, it's always been there, and it's been acceptable as long as you were in power. So this idea of oppression is not new, but we're now saying it's not acceptable. Do you see how there's some good coming out of us? Like that we were saying, no, we don't want oppression to be the thing that destroys people's lives. Ziba said to the king, there's still a son of Jonathan who is lame in his feet. So the king said to him, where is he? Now keep in mind this Mephibosheth we're going to meet. We've talked about him before. He was from the royal lineage. You want to talk about the cream of the crop. This kid was like rich kids of Instagram when he was born, being raised. He was raised in the king's house in the castle. Everything was lined up for him. He was Jonathan's son. And in a moment, Saul and Jonathan are killed in battle. And the nurse is running because now he is no longer royal lineage. He is now a liability to the next kingdom. Now this child goes from being part of the royal lineage to being literally condemned to die in a moment. And in a moment, the nurse is running and she drops him and he becomes handicapped. He becomes handicapped in both feet. He was lame in both feet. He was crippled. He was stripped of his royalty, and he is now hiding from the new power structure because the rights of the new power structure said they could have Mephibosheth put to death. And so now he's no longer royal lineage. He is a cripple living in hiding. You want to talk about oppression. It says, now when Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, had come to David, he fell on his face and prostrated himself. Then David said, Mephibosheth, he said, here's your servant. Verse 7, so David said to him, do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan your father's sake, and I will restore to you all the land of Saul your grandfather, and you shall eat bread at my table continually. David said, I could have you killed, but instead, what David said is, I'm going to call you family. When someone that's in a position of power shows kindness to someone with no power, and there's no rules that dictated that he had to, that is a demonstration of God's kindness to us. David, a man after God's own heart, was showing kindness to the son of Jonathan, and he says, you're not only going to come live in my house, your family, I'm going to give you everything that was Saul's. Now, if you want to know how badly someone has had their life go, if you want to get an idea of what it looks like when someone's life has just completely fallen apart and they have literally suffered circumstances that everybody would agree this person is a victim of life, this is the response. He says, then he bowed himself and said, what is your servant that you should look upon such a dead dog as I? See, the problem was not only that Mephibosheth was a victim, is that he had accepted it. I can never change this. This is what I was born into. These are my circumstances. This is why it's unfair. This is why it'll never change. This is why it's someone else's fault. Mephibosheth had accepted not only that he was a victim, but he had adopted a victim mentality, that he can't change anything, that he is of no value, he's of no worth. David is in a position of power, and Mephibosheth was technically his enemy, and he shows him kindness. Let me make this point right now. One point right now, is that power, someone in power, it does not equal oppressor. Now, I know that we've seen the two combined a lot. When someone's in power, they abuse that and they become an oppressor. But there is nothing that says that power is intrinsically bad. There's nothing that says someone in a position of power is intrinsically bad. And yet it's like right now we've decided that if you're in power, you must be an oppressor. You must be the beneficiary of a system that allowed you to be powerful, and you are thus intrinsically bad. And yet David says, I want to love you. David was in a position of power, and he showed love to Mephibosheth. Now, here's what's crazy. If this was 2020, you know what Mephibosheth could have said? It's not enough. I'm owed more. Legally, it's mine. Technically, it's mine. My grandfather was Saul. You took this. You robbed. You pillaged. You took advantage. You cheated. You took advantage of your privilege. You took advantage of your opportunity, and it's all technically mine. Why? Because when you empower people to feel like a victim, they will qualify their standing because they're a victim rather than the situation that is currently around them. And if you go, this sounds like victim shaming, all I'm saying is Mephibosheth realized that he was being shown mercy by someone in power. If everybody that's in power is the bad guy, you will eventually turn those guns on God. And you will say, you could have stopped this and you didn't, therefore you must not be good. Sometimes the people that get offended and scream victim are actually just entitled, spoiled little brats. I'm just going to let that sit in the air for a minute. 2 Samuel 15, Absalom, the son of David, had never known what it was like to go without. He was a trust fund baby, and he had this real strong sense of justice, real strong sense of right and wrong. And, you know, one of the things I love about the Bible is it doesn't write out the humanity of its characters. It doesn't pretend that they were perfect or that they didn't struggle or didn't have issues or sin. And it doesn't take that out. It includes it. And so Absalom was mad at David for good reason. David had really screwed up. He had failed to punish someone who needed punished, and Absalom sees this, and he goes, this isn't right. I'm going to take up this cause, anarchy. I've been wronged. I've been wronged. I don't deserve this, and so I'm going to take over the kingdom. Do you see how quickly someone can scream victim and rob the power of that word from someone like Mephibosheth? Here's what he did. He decided, I'm offended, and I'm going to go on the offensive. I'm going to take on the power structure. I'm going to call my dad David an oppressor, and I'm going to take over the kingdom. Let me show you how he did it and see if this sounds familiar. He would get up early, Absalom, and stand by the side of the road leading to the city gate. Whenever anyone came with a complaint to be placed before the king for a decision, Absalom would call out to him and go, what town are you from? Hey, friend. Hey, I'm one of you, buddy. Hey, how's it going? Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel. Then Absalom would say to him, look, your claims are valid and proper. You're a victim. You're suffering because of an oppressive system that's holding you down. Now listen, I'm not talking about victims. I'm talking about people who see an opportunity to capitalize on calling themselves victims. There is a difference. Your claims are valid and proper, but there's no representative of the king to hear you. And Absalom would add, if only I were appointed judge in the land, then everyone who has a complaint or a case could come to me, and I would see that they receive justice. Poor you, and poor you, and poor you, and poor you. Oh, I could just validate how big of a victim you are. Oh, this is terrible. The king doesn't get it. Why? He's an oppressor. He's bad. He must be bad because he's in a position of power. I'm not in a position of power. I'm one of you. I see your point. I know what we need to do. Let's set up Chaz. Sorry, that's probably a little too soon. He says, I'm going to set up a kingdom. I'm going to take over the kingdom. I'm going to take over my dad. And it doesn't go well. And listen, you read the story for yourself. But at one point, David flees the kingdom to try to save the life of Absalom, his little spoiled trust fund brat. Please don't walk out. I'll get better, I promise. Just hang on, give me a second. Flaws and all. We get to see flaws and all. David wasn't perfect. But as he's leaving the kingdom to try to save his son's life, don't you think that suspicion creeps in? Who is for me? Who is against me? Sometimes people are for you until they see an opportunity and they turn on you. I mean, it's not unreasonable to think that David was in sort of this weird place. And the Bible doesn't write that out of the story. And so when David flees, Mephibosheth doesn't go with him. And so in the back of David's mind, and Ziba tells him, oh, Mephibosheth turned on you. And David's going, maybe he did. I mean, honestly, he has a claim. I'm not saying that it's right, but he's got a claim that technically he should have been given even more than I did give him. Maybe he's the heir. You know, these are the things that just go through your mind in times of turmoil. And so he's going through this, who's with me, who's against me. Absalom is killed. David is returning into the city. And as he's returning into the city, who does he run into but Mephibosheth? Now, remember, David showed Mephibosheth kindness when he didn't have to. It was kindness that started the relationship. It wasn't rules. It wasn't you get over here, you do this, you do that. He literally demonstrated kindness, went to an enemy, and he didn't have to. So here comes Mephibosheth, 2 Samuel. Now we're in chapter 19, verse 24. Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, also went out to meet the king. He had not taken care of his feet or trimmed his mustache or washed his clothes from the day the king left until the day he returned safely. What does that tell you? This wasn't about rules. This was relational. This was personal. This was about two people who agreed that despite the circumstances, they were willing to lean into the relationship. Mephibosheth loved David because he refused to be offended with him. He refused to be offended. He refused to take on the mentality of a victim and claim his rights and claim that this isn't fair or that isn't fair. He said, I see what David did for me and I loved him. And so he says he didn't take care of himself till the day he returned safely. When he came from Jerusalem to meet the king asked him, this is David, why didn't you go with me, Mephibosheth? See what, David? He's like, what's going on? Why didn't you go with me? Fair enough. I mean, it's fair to go, are we? It's possible he could have seen a chance. David would have been completely justified in questioning his loyalty, but here's the answer. Verse 26, he said, Mephibosheth, my lord the king, since I, your servant, am lame, I said, I will have my donkey saddled and I will ride on it so I can go with the king. Anybody ever know anybody like this? They've got every excuse to say they're a victim, and they will not. Oh, Mephibosheth, you can't go, you're crippled. How dare you? Saddle my donkey. It would have been harder for him to follow the king than anybody else, and he didn't care. Meanwhile, you have people like, I don't know, I don't feel good. Ugh. Mephibosheth said, saddle my donkey, but Ziba, my servant, betrayed me. Ziba didn't honor the request. And then he has slandered your servant to my lord the king. My lord the king is like an angel of God, so do whatever you wish. Now, do you see what Mephibosheth? Mephibosheth is not insulted by the question. Mephibosheth is not insulted or offended that David asked him. He goes, I get it. I get it. But just know, I was loyal. You do whatever you want to do, but I never weakened because I am not a victim. I still retain my right to choose. See, that's the problem with the victim mentality. It's a recruitment method. Give up your rights, give up your choice, just join our crew. We'll tell you that you deserve, oh, yeah. But deep down, they're taking away choice. No, you just fall in line. You quote the quotes, you say the mantras, you get along with the team, and you get no choice. We'll say that you're a victim, that you're owed more from the oppressor, but really, they are the oppressor. If someone can turn you into a victim, they are your new oppressor. Mephibosheth said, I'm not doing it. Verse 28, all my grandfather's descendants. This is a perspective that is so valuable right now because instead of getting insulted, he leans in further and goes, David, all of my descendants deserve nothing but death from you. Mephibosheth is grasping to kindness and the relationship, and when David showed him kindness, he wasn't going to forget it. He said, I deserve death, and instead, you gave your servant a place among those who eat at your table, so what right do I have to make any more appeals to the king? He says, you're not my oppressor. You're family to me because you let me in. Isn't that what we're trying to say to God? Isn't that what God, you loved me when you didn't have to. You let me in. I'm not offended with you. I'm not a victim. I'm not running everybody's race. I'm not determined that $10 million in my bank account and a Harvard degree is the only way that people can be successful, because if it's the world standards, there are huge disadvantages that you'll never overcome. But if you're trying to decide what has God got for my life, there is no disadvantage that will keep you from it. There is hope, and there's choice, and there's personal accountability, and there's integrity, and there's character, and there's things that come into play that you don't get to have if you accept that you're a victim. You are robbing your future based on what happened in the past. Here's the confusing part. This is a verse I don't like. Are you allowed to say that about the Bible? Verse 29 said, the king said to him, why say more? You and Ziba divide the land. What? He just said Ziba had betrayed him and lied about him. And David just gave Ziba half of Mephibosheth's things. That's oppressive. That's a mistake. That's a huge screw up. If you're David, you're like, what are you doing? Like, what? It's offensive. Surely that's oppression, and surely that's where Mephibosheth will go, okay, Ziba? What does this have to do with kindness? Remember, sometimes kindness isn't about what it starts. Sometimes it's about what it ends. There is an offense that is trying desperately to get in and break up a relationship. There's an offense that's trying to happen. It's trying to capitalize on an opportunity to drive people apart. And Mephibosheth says, not today. He leans into the kindness that David had shown him, and he is reciprocating kindness. And when offense would get in and rob the friendship and the relationship and the benefit actually to Mephibosheth, Mephibosheth says this, let him take everything. We have got it so backwards in this nation right now. We've got it so backwards that says, I deserve and I have the rights and give me what's mine. And if you don't give me what's mine, you're an oppressor and I'm going to take it. And then people are here like, I earned it, I deserve it, I don't have to give anything to you. It's like we're not willing to be David or Mephibosheth. We don't have time for kindness because if we're kind, somebody might get what's ours. And we don't realize that God is the provider, not the system. Let him take everything now that my lord the king has returned home safely. He probably saved his own life, honestly, in doing that. Knowing David. He retained better through kindness. He kind of retained better for himself than he was going to get, had he not. But then he ended the possibility for offense. Let me say it this way. That the love for humanity on both sides, David and Mephibosheth, outweighed the narrative that would have caused offense. There's a narrative that says you need to be offended, you need to be enraged, you need to be loud and mad. We got two examples of people who said, we have the right and we don't want it. I don't want to be offended. I want kindness. I want love. I want relationship. I want to surround myself with peaceful people. I want to create a life for myself, and I'm willing to lay down or forbear things that maybe I'm owed because I want kindness. Remember that David said, I'm showing kindness to Mephibosheth. Why? Because he loved Jonathan. There was a higher love. There was a higher appeal. And when the Bible says that the fruits of the Spirit are kindness, what that means is because of a love for God, it draws us to higher. It draws us to aspire to higher kindness based on a love for God and show kindness to people that we don't even like. Kindness. Niceness. To be nice to people when we don't want to or when we don't feel like it. And the problem is this, is that we miss relationships between each other. We miss relationships between us and God. We become so offended with God or like God will get back to you. Kindness is a supernatural fruit that is produced when God is active in your life only. Apart from him, we cannot do it. If circumstances in your life have been unfair, I can't change that. And I'm not saying that everybody gets the same circumstances, but here's what I am saying. We serve a very loving and merciful God who can take any situation that you're in and shape your future to your benefit. And when we're determined to make victims out of people so they'll join our army, what we're doing is we're robbing them of their future. I'm saying you have a choice. You have a choice today. You have a choice tomorrow. There are choices in your mind. Nobody can take away the things that God has put in your mind as long as you're living and breathing. And you don't have to accept a mentality of a victim, regardless of the circumstances that you've had to endure. And if God is blessing you and things are going well, you don't have to be someone who uses that power at the expense of someone else. You are not automatically bad if things are going well, because that takes away your choice too. You have no choice in this. You're just bad because you're powerful or you're in a position of wealth or you're... No. God says it's kindness that leans into relationship and will not be offended and will not break apart humanity for the sake of a narrative. And it's hard. Let's pray. Lord, I pray that you would help explain this to us in a way that we can apply. God, people are not good because they've had it bad, and people are not bad because they've had it good. Lord, the only thing that brings us into right relationship with you is you. You are who does that in our lives. Help us to stop breaking apart the relationships that you've given us for the sake of a narrative. God, help us to lean into love. Lord, I pray that our police force adopt kindness as they're sorting this out. And I pray for the people who feel like that they've been oppressed, that they adopt kindness as they're trying to work this all out. God, as a nation, we desperately need kindness to return to the conversation because we are tearing each other apart. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.